Welcome to class. Politics, more than anything, comes down to domestic policy differences between Republicans and Democrats. If you look at elections, almost all of the fight that most voters base their vote on comes down to issues close to home. The economy, where each candidate falls on different social issues, such as their views on the woman's right to choose an abortion or same-sex marriage, civil rights issues. So it's very important that we take time to understand domestic policy and what that is and how it affects our policy and what influence presidents do and don't have over domestic policy. So to start, domestic policy is anything that happens locally within our own nation. And it can cover a broad set of issues. There are a number of different priorities in domestic policy that we'll take a look at, and presidents and people, you, need to stake out your views on each one of these things. First of all, let's talk about economic growth. So economic growth is a major priority for the president. The president is viewed as our economic leader, fairly or unfairly. It is true that the president is hugely responsible in working with Congress to create a budget that's going to grow the economy. But it is also true that because we live in a free market economy that is mostly not under government control, there are only limited things that the president can do to influence the growth or the non-growth of the economy. Presidents usually get more credit than they deserve when the economy is good, and more blame than they deserve when the economy is bad. Another major priority domestically is education. We recognize that you, our students, are the next generation of leadership for our country. And that's why I take my job with you so seriously as your teacher, and I care so much about each of you. We know that if you do well, if you learn to think critically, to achieve a clear proficiency with a wide set of skills, then you're going to go out in the world able to help this country compete in the 21st century, able yourself to move the country forward into a better tomorrow. But I should say that education, while it's a major priority, and presidents care a lot and talk about education quite a bit, it's, again, a state-level issue. And states have more authority than the federal government over education topics. Infrastructure is a major federal priority. When we talk about infrastructure, we talk about things like our roads and our bridges that we use to travel back and forth across the country. The interstate highway system is an example of our infrastructure that is maintained by the federal government. Airports and the Federal Aviation Authority, which regulate the safety practices and deal with air traffic control. That's part of the federal government. Another element of infrastructure at the local level would be things like your sewer lines, your water lines that are necessary for each house to have running water and be able to flush the toilet away. That's an example of infrastructure at the local level. Power lines and electricity. Our whole power grid is an important element of infrastructure, and the federal government has some role in overseeing some of those elements, but many of those things are also handled at the state and local level, especially when we're talking about water, sewer. That's all local. The federal budget is hugely contentious and controversial. There are major fights every year about what should get into the federal budget, what we should be paying for, what we should be prioritizing. There's the old saying, put your money where your mouth is. So if you look at the federal budget, that's where you really see what the priorities are of the nation. The major things in the federal budget that take up most of our money are paying for entitlement programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And the second major thing that we pay for is our national defense and our military. So those are the two largest aspects of the federal budget, and that has been true for a number of years. Environmental protection and making sure that we have clean air, clean water. This is an important domestic priority, and presidents take different stances on this. Some presidents view the environment and environmental protection as much more important than others. In general, Democrats tend to be more willing to enact laws to protect the environment than Republicans. Many conservatives or Republicans view these laws as, at times, being too restrictive on businesses, and they feel that if you pass too many of these regulations, businesses won't have the freedom to operate, and therefore it can cost jobs and reduce the overall productivity of the economy. So there is a trade-off. Do we care more about jobs and business, or do we care more about our planet and the environment? Oftentimes, we can have both. Sometimes we do have to make choices, and we should think carefully about the choices that we want to make. And we definitely have to spend some time thinking about social issues when we talk about domestic policy. This is a very broad category, and it includes a lot of different things. Some would say that environment falls under social issues, but here I'm talking about things like abortion and the right to have an abortion, and women's rights to choose. We're talking about controversial topics like same-sex marriage. We're talking about the degree to which we will or will not allow prayer in our public places. Some of these are settled questions, but some are not. The degree to which we're going to give up civil rights and civil freedoms and liberties to protect national security is an important domestic policy question. When we go to the airport, how far are we going to go with airport security screenings to protect national security, even though those things may violate our civil liberties? Are we going to allow the nation's national security apparatus, like the National Security Agency or the FBI, to phone tap and monitor phone calls of everybody in case they can pick up information that's going to help them in their fight against terrorism? These are questions that we have to think about. Other social issues are things like civil rights, affirmative action. Are we going to use race as one among other factors in university admissions to give a leg up to people who have been historically discriminated against in this country? Some people feel that we have gotten to a point where we should be colorblind, that we should not let race be a factor in admissions at all. Other people feel like there are still inadequacies in education that are largely divided along income and racial lines, and we do still need affirmative action as a way to correct historic injustices. The gender divide, the glass ceiling. Women still, on average, make less money than men, even in the same jobs. That's a social issue that domestic policy would seek to address. So all of these are domestic policy preferences. The tax rate that people pay. Taxes as a part of the federal budget are major components of domestic policy. So tax policy, make sure you include that in your notes for today. Some people are more comfortable with a higher rate of taxes so that we can provide more services than others. Other people feel like we should lower taxes even if it means we're not going to be able to do as much in terms of things like food stamps or Medicaid or Social Security and funding the military. So that's a brief description of our domestic policy priorities. We'll discuss these in more detail and do some activities in class where you actually have to make your own policy choices, and you'll have to create your own federal budget based on what you think we should spend money on and what you think we can afford to cut. All right, have a great day, and we'll check in later.